It was first block, gym class, and I was standing in the boys' locker room, sweating and insecure. And me and my newfound tenuous friends were talking about the day to come. Steve, a guy I only knew from gym, was bitter over a C he got on an English assignment and was complaining that the curtains are blue. Mr. So-and-so said they're about depression, but they're just blue. We all nodded in solemn agreement, a burgeoning class solidarity with our fellow students. But I, always something of an elitist, felt disagreeable towards Steve. Although I never said anything at the time, his statement stuck with me, and now, decades later, I've decided to make a sculpture. I call it Blue Curtains. I hope it's as beautiful as you imagine, Steve. There's nothing here but blue curtains. A pure representation, devoid of subtext. Is this art? Perhaps not. Let's remove the curtains from the rail away from where they should be. That's better, although now the green screen implies an artificial space. It makes the curtains a simulacrum of actual curtains and emphasizes the pessimistic view that representational art isn't representational of life at all, but rather poetic forgery. Removing it further, let's say to a parking lot, that naked symbol of anti-human American capitalism and its destruction of recreational and domestic spaces, and I'll do you one better. Let's take a picture with a Polaroid, and now you're not even looking at the curtains, but a poor photographic representation of the curtains. But even that isn't exactly true, because you're looking at this through a computer or phone or TV screen. Another camera is filming the product of another camera, and we are so many shallow but extent layers deep that the question moves beyond not only if it's art, but if they're even curtains. Is this all artsy-fartsy nonsense? Yeah, and I wouldn't fight against that claim. The difference between me and actual good minimalist artists is that they create sculpture and painting so divorced from meaning and context and interpretation that it takes on the appearance of negative effort. But still, to my own credit, the curtains are blue. That's all they are. It's all they'll ever be. Treasure it, Steve. It's what you wanted all along. What I would find out years later is that the blue curtain wasn't just a creative outburst by Steve, but a meme, a circulated argument against the overreach of English teachers desperately searching for meaning and symbolism and metaphor where there simply isn't any. On a personal level, I want to say that the reason people resonate with this meme is because, well, they just didn't pay enough attention in school or are overly arrogant in regards to their own intelligence. Of course, everyone's experience with school is different from one another's, and also is going to be different from a Poindexter school teacher like myself. The impulse towards this meme is driven more so by the tendency of people to be aggravated both by overly literal art and by overly metaphorical art. With the minimalism example, what aggravates so many people is that minimalist art gives nothing to its viewer other than itself, while asking absolutely nothing of the audience. An abstract painter like Piet Mondrian at least gives the viewer a canvas that's pretty and neat to look at, a painting cool enough to commodify and turn into socks and magnets and cat postcards. Donald Judd's Untitled, 1991, or Carl Andre's 144 lead square are entirely without meaning. You're looking at aluminum bars and lead tiles, my boy. I hope you're happy with that $15 you pay for admissions, but we'll talk more about that later. The challenge that minimalist art presents to the blue curtains is that it provides sites entirely devoid of context or subtext. Lead tiles are lead tiles, and blue curtains are blue curtains. It's art taken to the extreme, and if I had to guess, I'd say most people who believe in the blue curtain meme don't like minimalism because most people don't like minimalism because minimalism doesn't give the viewer anything to like. No plot, no characters, no themes, no aesthetic pleasure, no transcendent beauty, no laughs, no scares. By being form without content, many viewers will ask, why am I looking at blue curtains? This is a reductive definition of minimalist art because a more nuanced and robust exploration would take hours, but I think this simplified definition does a good job illustrating why people find minimalism frustrating, even from a blue curtain perspective. Minimalist art is, by design, frustrating because it actively violates the relationship that capitalism has created between viewers and art. Earlier, when I said that I hoped minimalism was worth your admission fee, this is what I was referencing. Modern capitalism has shaped our relationship with art into a transactional one, where you pay money and are given some sort of experience in exchange. Preferably, that experience will not be unlike, say, a meal from McDonald's. Ready-made and not, well, nothing. You still need to do the work of consuming it, but not struggle with making it. It's not a perfect metaphor, but the general principle is the same. Audiences pay for a work of art using money they labored for and want that work of art to do the legwork of engaging or entertaining them in some way. That slobbery threesome between art, viewers, and capitalism is a tangled mess that can't fully be separated, nor are all three intrinsically linked. Narrative art that neatly fits with the expectations of common audiences didn't begin with capitalism, nor did bad art. Narrative art goes back to the ancient Greeks and Mesopotamians and must certainly be much older than that in extinct oral traditions. Capitalism's direct effect on art would be that it would mechanize the production and distribution of art, commodify art, and emphasize the transactional relationship between art and viewer. Not all of these changes are necessarily bad for art. The commodification of art has democratized access to art as well as the tools needed to create art. A movement like the Italian Renaissance wouldn't be possible under capitalism because its system of patronage wouldn't be profitable, but capitalism, with its emphasis on quick turnaround and increase in access, opened the door for artists like Picasso and Jean-Michel Basquiat to find commercial success, even if only among the moneyed elite. The proliferation of art under capitalism has had the effect of narrowing the scope that viewers look at art through. Music, film, books, and video games are viewed as consistent sources of comfort, constantly accessible and judged by many for their capacity to comfort. As workplace and labor alienation increases in our highly atomized society, the desire for easy comfort in our leisure time increases. This is further compounded by how, at least in America, the social structure everywhere from schools to workplaces to the layout of cities themselves promote isolation. Art has become one of the few constants in people's lives, as it's one of the few things accessible from home, placing it in contrast with other cultural beacons like local shops or food or parks that people are often financially and geographically isolated from. Access to art has shifted so far from where it used to be 200 to 300 years ago that it has ironically begun to have a chilling effect on that access. With almost all art in the world theoretically available with an internet connection, audiences, overwhelmed without curation, drift more into comfort zones. Capitalism and marketing do serve as a curator of sorts through what companies prioritize to produce and advertise, but it exploits the problem of limited curation rather than solving it. As the postmodern condition has metastasized, increases in brand repetitiveness and, by extension, art repetitiveness have proliferated. Marvel has been the dominant commercial force in film for the last 15 years, in large part because each film serves as a comfort vehicle, offering a stream of references and callbacks and foreshadows to other familiar films and characters, all packaged in a moderately engaging narrative. It's worth remembering that the target of the Blue Curtains meme is English teachers. School, both intentionally and out of necessity, gives many students the ability to understand art on a functional level, but not on a metaphorical level. As a sunk cost necessity of American capitalism, schools are in form and content designed to prepare students for work or prison. Because capitalism conditions those living under it by having money be the tool for both survival and consumption, Schools bill themselves primarily as job preparedness clinics, and this maroons art and language education. Of all the core American subjects, English and its subsidiaries, literature and art, face an uphill battle from not funneling directly into work, beyond the basic skills of reading and writing comprehension. They are typically the most underfunded and understaffed areas in high schools. Capitalism as an economic structure is only going to fund schools where there is long-term benefit for capitalism. High school football generates capital, and STEM theoretically creates job preparedness so they can achieve levels of funding and staffing impossible for the humanities. In reality, American schools don't produce scientists, or doctors, or lawyers, or thinking people, but human metronomes. The skill imparted by American education, both public and private, is repetition. Schools train people to find a correct answer and enter it into a datasheet, or correctly enter in a fast food order, or to correctly follow directions from bosses and superiors. Any type of literary analysis that relies on metaphorical understanding or interpretive gray zones, like the blue curtains, exists outside the overall zeitgeist of American education. The correct answer for why the curtains are blue is because they are blue curtains. In order to function in capitalism, that's all you need to know, and the frustration that many have with these hypothetical English teachers is that such analysis exists outside the realm of pushing buttons. This outcome is not intentional at the individual level of a teacher-student relationship, but is rather a product of the realities of education. In my career as an educator, I have had to consistently unlearn all the starry-eyed optimism and fancy that arouses the imagination of potential teachers. It's common to see and hear people say that, if I were a teacher, I would, and go on to describe complex levels of lesson differentiation and idyllic tasks, and none of that is relevant when you step foot into a classroom. Because of how little time is given to individual teachers away from students, and because of how unintentional most class rosters are structured by schools, the levels of differentiation required in an individual room are often untenable, and it is therefore required to teach at the level of the lowest student in a given room. To get a child to the point of understanding that blue curtains are blue curtains constitutes something of a minor miracle. The side effect of focusing so strongly for so long on comprehension in reading and the institutional goal of getting the correct answer is that the blue curtains being blue curtains simultaneously becomes the ceiling for many students' analytical abilities and the assumed destination. Art is also, therefore, viewed not just as comforting but also as functional. A book must be comforting, and part of that comfort is containing functional sentences. The blue curtains meme isn't a call for literal and deliberately meaningless art like minimalism. Minimalism contains no function. The lead tiles do not function as lead tiles, even as they exist as lead tiles. Blue curtains cannot simply be blue curtains, but not in the sense that they would represent depression. They must hide the stalking killer or conceal the portal to another world. The blue curtains are blue curtains, but they must also function as a plot or world-building object, existing both as themselves, but also doing something that can be literally and correctly understood. In his book, Capitalist Realism, Mark Fisher argues that under capitalism, beliefs have collapsed at the level of ritual or symbolic elaboration, and all that is left is the consumer spectator, which illustrates why the blue curtains have become such a resilient meme. We are trained to be consumers of art, rather than patrons of it. When I am feeling particularly pessimistic, I would call blue curtain proponents lazy readers, but I believe economic and social conditions, along with the modes of how art is accessed, create blue curtain readers more than intentional laziness. I believe instead that blue curtain proponents are comfort readers. The paradox of the comfort reader is that they don't want to do a lot of work to find meaning, but they also don't want to do nothing. There has to be something there, but not too much. They want to be both engaged and disengaged. Up until now, I haven't focused on the opposite of minimalist art, and the artistic target of the blue curtain meme, which is metaphorical art. Poetic art that represents at once both itself and that which lies beneath itself. Most narrative art, most good narrative art for that matter, is easily understood without much metaphorical digging. The blue curtains are blue curtains, but they are also depression, but if you never identify the curtains as depression, you're still fine. For the comfort reader, it may still be frustrating to see the metaphorical connection of blue curtain and depression being made, but it can be ignored. There is art where it cannot be ignored. Periodically throughout this video, I have referenced poetic art, and I think it's worth defining what I mean by poetic art. Poetic art is any art, representational, narrative, or otherwise, where every image or word is at once both a representation of itself and a metaphor. This is in contrast to functional art, art where every image or word is a representation of itself and a function within the larger narrative gearworks. Metaphor in functional art still happens, but in weaker works it is often sporadic or incidental. Poetic art is, among other things, notable for its difficulty, and that makes poetic art less accessible by its nature. Rather than requiring money or status to access, poetic art demands thought, focus, and meditation. These are skills that are often left untaught by schools, and it is worth saying that quality of education does play a role here, with capitalism's emphasis on function making an education in poetic art a footnote. This shapes the common critical approach to treat all art, even poetic art, as functional art. The blue curtains cannot be depression, because to be depression is for the curtains to exist outside their function. YouTube serves as a great testing ground for common critical modes because the barrier to entry is an internet connection, microphone, and some free editing software. Regardless of whatever you think of any video essayist or reviewer or critic on YouTube, the overwhelming majority of them write from a functional perspective, and analysis is heavily focused on the functionality of the art. This is why plot summary, and by extension plot holes and continuity errors, are such a huge focus of YouTube critics. Such a perspective is fundamentally incapable of viewing the blue curtains as depression because it isn't a quantifiable and definitive function. When going through many Reddit and Twitter posts about the blue curtains, I tried to find examples that included specific books and authors and symbols. I'm not including links or screenshots because I don't want to put random internet commenters on blast, but some of the examples I saw were criticisms against the metaphorical analyses of The Great Gatsby, The Scarlet Letter, and The Crucible. None of this surprises me because these are books common to high school curricula. The reason these books are often selected is because their metaphorical content is easy relative to other poetic art. But as an example, I saw one person argue that the green light in The Great Gatsby isn't symbolic of anything beyond being a green light, and that the light is there because docks have light. This is a product of a functional perspective. The Great Gatsby is a functional novel, because there is a light on the deck, and docks are supposed to have lights, so therefore The Great Gatsby functions. This comes off as circular reasoning, but that's the point of a functional perspective. Like an electrician creating a closed circuit, the functional perspective in art looks to close all the loops, to complete the circuits, to show that images and words recur onto themselves to create definable and logical loops. Daisy's light, barely visible to Gatsby, cannot be a metaphor for Gatsby's hopes or desires, because that is an incidental metaphor that doesn't close the loop for why the light is there to begin with. To dig for metaphors is to open up poetic wilds, to create a wide range of knots that can't be tied in quantifiable or functional manners. This is simply the toolkit that many readers have access to, but it doesn't imply that readers don't crave deeper understandings of poetic art. Returning to Fisher, he observes that some students want Nietzsche in the same way they want a hamburger. They fail to grasp that the indigestibility, the difficulty, is Nietzsche. I want to expand this to say that people want to understand art on a higher level, but they don't know how to approach difficulty. In this video, I won't be teaching how to understand metaphors, because I don't think we really have time for that. The best way to learn how to approach metaphor isn't to study a program, but to talk with others, to join a book club, or take a literature elective in college, and to focus not on solving the art, but on feeling the art, and letting conversations go on, and dig around wherever they may lead you. Even if you feel like you're only able to discuss or understand the more basic metaphorical techniques like theme or symbolism, still go for it, because it's a journey that has no end, only a start. There are many artists that are so poetic and so difficult that common readers simply don't approach them to begin with, and would sooner abandon their works than apply a functional analysis to them. Andrei Tarkovsky, Hart Crane, and late James Joyce all offer images and words so poetic, so dense with unquantifiable metaphorical meaning, with such wild disregard for functionality that they are incapable of being understood in a functional mode. Where the intersection between function and poetry becomes most fraught is with intensely poetic artists that also weave functional plots. Shakespeare's plays sit perfectly at this impasse as they occupy both the entertainment and functional sphere, while also being written by perhaps the most metaphorical and poetically commanding artist in world literature. I have commonly seen Shakespeare plays, especially his larger tragedies and late-career romances. Plays like Hamlet and King Lear and The Tempest get criticized for their poor storytelling. Hamlet's disregard for its own timeline and its Act 4 digressions, and Lear's meandering middle section, and The Tempest's plotlessness are viewed by many as flaws because they offer incomplete circuits. On the self-proclaimed objective level of functional critics, it is a flaw that Hamlet's time skip doesn't mathematically add up. However, such an approach doesn't actually further any understanding of Hamlet, because to listen to and to read Act 4 isn't an act of understanding the function of the words in the clockwork of plot, but the poetic depth of the words. Hamlet's dull revenge soliloquy adds nothing on a functional level to the plot, but a seemingly non-functional passage like, "What is a man if his chief good and market of his time be but to sleep and feed? A beast, no more," asks a metaphorical question that reverberates through the plot and our understanding of the story and characters without technically advancing the plot. Understanding poetic passages in art can be difficult, but oftentimes the strongest impediment to understanding is a functional perspective that asks questions of usefulness before questions of meaning. As Hart Crane wrote, "The harvest you describe and understand needs more than wit to gather. You cannot simply describe the mechanics of poetic art, you must experience the art, and to experience it requires a willingness to meditate and reread and work, and an openness to make personal analysis that cannot be closed, but rather opens up more depth. You need to enter what Harold Bloom calls the reader's sublime. The reader's sublime is best understood as the satisfaction you get after struggling with something. Anyone who's worked out, or anyone who loves struggling through and overcoming difficult games, has experienced this feeling of the sublime, where struggling with the work is an integral part of the ultimate enjoyment. What makes this frustrating for many is that this experience of the sublime is personal and cannot be understood with simple logistics. Many viewers may remain skeptical because an emphasis on metaphorical reading cannot be quantifiably proven with the logic of functional art, whereas functional art can be seemingly self-proven with its simple circular logic. What makes such logic so tantalizing is that the primary value of consumer capitalism is function. If you buy an electric screwdriver or a dishwasher or a dresser, you want to get a product that, among other considerations, works. After purchasing a dishwasher, the first question a consumer will ask is if it washes dishes. If it washes dishes, then it's a good dishwasher, and therefore, the customer made a good purchase. This circular logic is a simple question of function, the same closed circuit used for functional art. Consumer capitalism does not view art as a category separate from furniture, appliances, cars, or food. At the corporate level, selling a consumer a couch or a book or a recurring subscription service all serve the same goal of profit, and this mindset limits the imaginations of not just corporations, but consumers as well. Access to art is, for the most part, walled behind the same resource as other goods and services: money. This creates a subconscious connection between art and product. In the eyes of the viewer, they need to be given value and function from a film the same way they need to be given value and function from a coffee maker. I can't blame audiences for this, when the entire culture, and it is at this point a global culture with the global hegemony that American capitalism has attained, it is hard to engage with questions beyond the function of an object. This is why so many critics that focus so intensely on plot holes and continuity errors or hitbox issues consider themselves objective. Under consumer capitalism, it is seen as the only question, the natural question, the eternal question. This places poetic art at odds with capitalism as a mode of production and consumption. Not only does poetic art ask questions of itself that go beyond restrictions of functionality, it also makes demands of the audience that are antithetical to consumerism. Earlier, we looked at the paradox of the comfort reader as being that a work of art needs something for a reader to engage with, but not too much. The comfort reader and the functional critic all have the expectation that the work of understanding art and conversing with art was done at the point of purchase, with the belief that when a ticket or book is bought, the viewer has, by right of purchase, an entitlement to understanding. The consumer works for money, and money is then given in exchange for services rendered, and that service could be clear, simple, functional art. Art that demands the viewer work for the pleasure of enjoying and understanding it is violating the transactional nature of money, where a service needs to be rendered unto the purchaser. The same way a fast food worker hands out a ready-made meal in a drive-thru, a work of art needs to be an easily digestible piece of entertainment that can be absorbed rather than pondered. Unlike many people who've observed the effects of consumer capitalism and the postmodern condition, I am not completely pessimistic about people. I believe that there are some universal yearnings in people, such as the desire for the sublime, that capitalism blunts and dulls, but can never fully erase. We can see this with the blue curtains themselves. When Steve told me in the gym locker room that the teacher was claiming the blue curtains represented depression and that it was dumb, I didn't think much about it. When I heard the blue curtains referenced again years later, it struck me that the meme and that Steve were referencing the same object. It is a revealing symbol because the blue curtains do not exist in any book. It is a simulacrum of literary symbols designed to resemble the kind of symbols that a high schooler might encounter in The Great Gatsby, or The Scarlet Letter, or Lord of the Flies, without actually being one of them. That the blue curtains aren't real shows a certain angst, a conflict inside functional criticism. The belief that the argument is that objects only stand for themselves, but what if the fictional teacher in the blue curtains is right? The reason this meme doesn't use Daisy's Light or the picture of Dorian Gray is because no one wants to be that guy that doesn't understand Keats's Nightingale. The blue curtain proponent isn't an idiot by default, but they are acutely aware that their meme could make them look like an idiot. So a made-up symbol is used in lieu of real literary symbols that could, in theory, expose their own ignorance. This feeling, deep in the gut, that there is more beyond the simple function of things is the same impression of the sublime that compelled prehistoric man to bury the dead with art and offerings. And it is from this same gut feeling that arises all art itself. The blue curtains may not be a real example, but they express a real feeling, a real conflict in the soul of one who repeats it, because it's not as if any of this is actually real in a quantified sense. The tragic hero is fake. The Byronic hero is fake. Milton's Satan is fake. Prometheus did not give us fire. And the blue curtains are not blue. All art, from the cave scribblings of prehistoric man to the great masterpieces to the forgotten poems of a bored high schooler, pour forth from the same wellspring. It is a quest to understand and to express that which lies beneath, that which lies within our souls. And this is a quest whose questions and answers cannot be quantified and can only be understood to whatever extent they enrich our inner lives. In science, our understanding of reality breaks down as reality escapes the limits of our perception. The human mind is not built to interpret and understand the outmost limits of the stars or of the quantum fields. Yet, even so, we continue to pursue the answers hidden behind these impossible horizons because the quest itself is too intoxicating. The burning hole in our gut that we feel when we do not know the answer is what propels us in science, and it is also the same fissure in ourselves that drives art. We do not know ourselves, and art is our attempt at learning just a little bit more of ourselves. In the same way that science has no endpoint, art too has no final answer. The blue curtains cannot just be blue, because if they are just blue, then why did we imagine them? Why were we compelled to make a meme about them, and to argue about them? Why did Shakespeare imagine Hamlet? After 10,000 years of art and philosophy, all occurring with the simultaneous and more urgent desire to survive, we have no answer. And I expect that in 10,000 years more, we will be no closer to that inner truth than we will be to holding water in our hands. We will think, internally, that we have found it. And then suddenly, as soon as we feel we've captured it, it slips away into the waves of the ocean. The perception of art as a service for the spectator-consumer is worth investigating further, as the barrier it places between art and viewer makes the already elusive origins and answers in art even more vaporous. Art does not need an audience, but an audience fundamentally transforms the art. The Blue Curtains meme specifically states that the hypothetical author's hypothetical intention is that the blue curtains are blue and there's nothing more to it. The problem here is that in art, the author is carrying on only one half of the conversation. Death of the author is a bread and butter topic of YouTube video essayists, and so as to prevent this video from becoming parody, I don't want to dedicate much time on it, except to say that death of the author as an ethos can have the effect of turning art into artifacts, objects that can be selectively dug through on an as-need basis. Art is very much alive, given life by the artist and, in turn, by the viewer. All art is a two-way conversation between viewer and text. Instead of the viewer being an empty vessel having content being poured into them, and instead of the text being an empty vessel having the viewer's perspective being poured into it, the engagement between art and viewer is as two full vessels being mixed and forced to converse between one another. The painting is not a blank canvas, and neither is the viewer. It is often said as a retort to the Blue Curtains that every word is intentional by an artist, and while this is true for shorter forms like poetry and short stories, it can become a little more cumbersome for novels. Novels are simply too long for perfect intentionality beyond artists like James Joyce, who could afford to spend 17 years on a single novel. There are many, many accidents in novels, and that can be an important element in the conversation between art and viewer. Conversations do not need the authoritative guide of authorial intent, but the authorial decision to paint blue curtains as an image in the mind of the readers opens the blue curtains as a point of conversation, as a point of struggle between the art and the reader. The foundational error of the blue curtain is that it views the inner soul as a non-entity, and art as a realm to be mastered by elementary logic. Engagement with poetic art is a search for oneself, while a refusal to engage is an attempt to turn oneself into a consumer, a devourer of product. A willingness to be wrong, a willingness to break from the mindset of capitalist production and consumption, and a willingness to struggle with oneself and art will open the landscape of art, which is a beautiful place to be. Not because it can be solved, but precisely because it cannot be. I don't know where Steve is now, and I honestly don't remember ever talking to him beyond that locker room that one time. He left an impact on me, and for that, I hope he's happy. Although I don't know how happy he'd be over it being some banal, stupid thing he said 10 years ago. But still, I hope he's happy, and I hope he likes the sculpture. He earned it.